Well, I'm all yours.
Can we start now? Yes. So hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this live discussion with Professor Gilles Kepel today. And we're going to talk about his new book, Away from Chaos, the Middle East and the Challenge to the West. So we have 1 hour in front of us now. We will make sure that we have time for Q&As with the audience at the end of the questions. We will ask the questions via the chat. Please make sure that your microphone is off. I think that's the case for everyone now, so thank you very much. And please refrain from interrupting the discussion with your microphone if you can during the discussion. And again, we will have time for questions later. So I would like to welcome Professor Gilles Kepel. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today. As a Sciences Po alumni myself, I know that there are generations of Sciences Po students who attended your class, worked on your books, and then went on with their lives after they graduated. However, many of them, I'm sure, are here today and actually form a substantial part of your international fan base. Those people who buy your books, they attend your conferences and listen carefully when you appear in the media to talk about your favorite subject. So my name is Julian Altero. I'm based in London. I head the Sciences Po Alumni UK chapter. I graduated back in 2003 from Sciences Po. At the time, we talked a lot at Sciences Po about 9/11 and the consequences on the world and many things. It seems like a long time ago now, but it certainly is still relevant to our time. A few words of presentation about our guest speaker, Professor Gilles Kepel, a renowned political scientist and Arabist, a world expert on Islamist terrorism, the Middle East and North Africa, and a professor at Sciences Po. He's the author of many widely acclaimed books. I will just mention a few, like Terror in France, The Rise of Jihad in the West, The War for Muslim Minds, Islam and the West, and Beyond Terror and Martyrdom, The Future of the Middle East. I will avoid a long presentation of Gilles Kepel. I'm sure many of you here know you well. And in case you want to learn more, you're welcome to go on the internet and find out yourself, so we can keep this time for the discussion. So let's start the discussion, Professor. Your latest book, Away from Chaos, the Middle East and the Challenge to the West, is an extensive review of 4 decades of Middle East history. It's a fascinating account of events that shaped the region. We're talking about military conflicts, external interventions, human tragedies, complex domestic and regional politics, religious forces, the Arab Spring, Syria, and so on. The New York Times said recently about your book, I quote, he said, "Your book is devoid of the crippling ideological blinders that sometimes disfigure books about the Middle East, a region so rife with ideology," which indeed is always welcome when one tries to understand a region and how it is currently changing. So in your view, Gilles Kepel, a new era has now begun for the region, potentially, with the destruction of the ISIS so-called caliphate, the monarchies in the Gulf pushing for a reformist agenda, the changes in world oil production with the US, and many other factors. You're talking about a new era for the region. Now, I'm very tempted to ask you this first question as we're just coming out of the biggest world pandemic in recent human history and possibly entering the biggest world economic depression ever seen. I want to ask you, what is the impact on the Middle East of the COVID-19 situation? And more important, the low oil prices combined with the economic issues that we're seeing on the region. So please, Gilles, we are listening.
Thank you so much, Julien, and hello to all the alumni who are watching us, whether they were my former students or not, maybe my future students, but I'm going to be 65, so there's not going to be many more students anymore in the future. Thanks for this introduction and this very stimulating first issue. Actually, the COVID-19 crisis took place at a time when already the oil market was undergoing some problems. You know, at the beginning of the year, we had reached some of the highest prices ever, with a very strange situation because the United States had become the first net oil exporter with approximately 15 million barrels a day out of 100, with Russia and Saudi Arabia following with a little less than that, and then the rest. And but then, you know, oil had stopped to be a weapon, a political weapon in the arms of the in the hands, sorry, of the Arabs or of the Russians. You know, Vladimir Putin originally at this conference in March in Vienna, the so-called OPEC plus meeting, that is the OPEC countries plus Russia, just decided to start a sort of an offensive in order to oust the American shale oil producers from the market, because they cannot follow if prices are below a certain level. And therefore, after they would have been ousted, then they would have controlled production, and the prices would have gone up again, but without the Americans, because they could not have survived in the meanwhile. This led to contradictions between Russia and Saudi Arabia, and they both increased significantly their production. And then COVID-19 came in full blast, and there was no demand for oil anymore in the market, something which was totally unbelievable. And the barrel reached one day in April, sometime in late April, the price of minus $37, i.e. people would pay $37 so that you take your oil away from the tanks or wherever, the tankers and the tanks, and where it was kept. And so this created an unbelievable combination of pressure on the Middle East. On the one hand, in a way, even though the book was written before, even if the American translation was updated to early 2020, with it ends with the termination or the vaporization, if you'd rather, of the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad by an American drone. Nevertheless, in a way, the combination of COVID-19 and the crash of the oil markets, in my understanding, sort of ends this sort of time period which I try to review in the book, because I start the book with the October War of 1973, October 73, which corresponded that year with Yom Kippur on the one hand and Ramadan on the other, where because the West went to the rescue of Israel after an initial attack by the Arabs, backed by the Russians at the time, or the USSR at the time, then Arab oil producers, headed by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, decided to embargo oil exports to countries that were supporting Israel. And therefore, that led to a skyrocketing of oil prices, and oil became a weapon, which it was not from World War II until this moment. And so the Middle East was sort of hooked to the world system, first and foremost through oil, and also something that went with oil was the politicization of Islam, perceived first in a conservative way, sponsored by Saudi Arabia. But then 6 years after, with the advent of the Iranian Revolution in '79, there was an attempt by the Iranians to hijack this politicization of Islam in a revolutionary and anti-American dimension or direction. And this fight has been ongoing for the last 4.5 decades. We have probably reached a climax this year, because this model that function in the region and in the world is not sustainable anymore. As you mentioned, there are all those reforms which are foreseen, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula and in Saudi Arabia, first and foremost, because oil is not enough. There's been a tremendous demographic growth, and you cannot live out of a rentier economy. Otherwise, the whole political organization of the region is going to fall down. And this is why Saudi Arabia, but also the United Arab Emirates and a few others, have started to think about the post-oil economy, which has led to some reforms in Saudi Arabia with, for instance, and something which is very striking with the COVID-19 crisis, the fact that Saudi Arabia took immediate measures to restrict the pilgrimage, did not issue visas to go to the lesser pilgrimage, which is called in Arabic Umrah, for fear of contamination and infection. And it's not been decided yet, but it is very likely that they will not allow the major pilgrimage, the Hajj, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, to take place this year. So there are some religious precedents, but there is a very strong pressure from rigorous Salafi groups or jihadi groups that say this is a betrayal of religion. And this is a very important thing, because it means that the Saudi leadership is now becoming, to some extent, indifferent in terms of its own legitimacy to what the religious rulers may rule or not rule. I mean, it has to deal with them cautiously, but they are not the decision makers. Contrast that with Iran, because in Iran, Mr. Khamenei, the guide or the leader of the Islamic Republic, is heavily dependent on the Islamic and the clerical establishment. He couldn't do anything against the Shia pilgrimage to the tombs of saints in Qom, in Mashhad, and other places. And I don't know whether any of you has ever witnessed the pilgrimages in Iran, where people, crowds flock around the tombs, they kiss the bars, they lick, they strike and everything. And of course, there is no hydroalcoholic, certainly not anything which is given to the pilgrims to clean their hands or their lips or whatever. So this was a sure recipe to propagate and to the virus at incredible speed. And this is why Iran was so hardly hit by that. So this is a big change which is happening. Also, add to that, apart from the internal, and maybe we'll get back to that later, conflict in the region for hegemony on the Gulf, between the Saudi bloc and the Iranian crescent, or the Shiite crescent, which has to do also with the situation in Syria, with its unbelievable developments in Libya, also today, where you have Turkey and Russia competing against each other, but being allied against Western and European presence in Libya, which is extremely important. Apart from that, there is a major issue which will be of interest to the London Stock Exchange, the Lloyds, but also to our American friends from overseas. That is that the Gulf region was a hub for globalization. It was a hub for globalization because you had tankers and cargoes and freight ships coming from China and from Asia, loaded with, manufactured products from textile to semiconductors to what have you, that were unloaded in Jebel Ali in the Emirates, then boarded on planes to go to Africa, to Central Asia, to Europe, or what have you. If the sort of supply chain to China system is criticized as it is, if it decreases in intensity, that means, and there were studies by the Dubai Chamber of Commerce that seem to show that very recently, that a looming economic crisis is going to take place in the region, not only because of the oil issue, the crash of the oil prices, but also because of the fact that the sort of hub dimension of the region between Asia and Europe is not going to have the same magnitude as it had before. So these are only a few items, if to describe how the present crisis has impacted the Middle East, and also how it deals with a number of challenges that trace back to the 1970s. This is why I believe this is a defining moment. And when I entitled the book Away from Chaos, or Sortir du Chaos in French, I had that in mind. But to some extent, what the developments have confirmed the sort of assumptions that I made. Now, the away from, or the sortir thing is clear. Whether or not this is going to be out of chaos or into more chaos is another issue. But what I believe is that we're really at it's a watershed period, definitely, in the region. Now, if you allow me, Julien, just a couple of words on something else, that is that, there will be a rise again, or there has already been a rise in oil prices, because the market has started again to buy oil, even though there is a very strong environmental change. People have learned to live without moving. Our relation to transportation has changed. We're now on a video conference instead of moving from Paris to London or wherever. So this is going probably to last, and to we're not going to live as we lived. So this is going to lead to tremendous changes in transportation, in consumption of liquid fossils. That's one thing. But nevertheless, in the meanwhile, bankrupts, economic crises, and the like are going to rise in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa, probably with more magnitude than is the case in Europe, because there is no social security, or very little welfare systems and the like. And this, of course, will create significant tensions on two issues: undocumented immigration across the Mediterranean, and then the fact that Libya is now under a sort of dual Russian-Turkish control is, of course, a matter of major concern for recipient countries of immigrants from Africa, i.e. Europe, particularly countries with a Mediterranean shoreline. And B, the other issue is that the very stability of the political systems of the region is going to be under stress. Social peace was bought in a number of countries, particularly in rentier oil rent countries like Algeria, for instance. Social peace was delivered because oil money was redistributed in a patronage system to clients of the different regimes. If this oil money is missing, this will probably lead to very significant pressures. So on the political system. So this is one of the major problems today. There is a strong need for a vision for the future of the region and this is a major challenge for us Europeans. And when I say Europeans, of course, I mourn, like all the frogs, the British leap, if I may use the frog metaphor, on the other side of the channel. But among other things, because Europe cannot survive if we don't have a security policy and a defense policy in common.
Gilles, excuse me, if I...
Go ahead.
Sorry, Gilles, yeah, sorry. Before we talk about Europe, actually, we will come to this subject, if I may. You've talked about, how this current situation is a defining moment. You've talked about the potential economic shocks that we may see in the region. You've also talked about the new players that we are seeing in the region, like Russia and Turkey in the region. So my question is about, obviously, you see me coming, is about the US. The Trump administration is willing to withdraw from the region. At least that was the policy until recently. You may tell us more if you know more, obviously. We had Egypt threatening to launch military action against Turkish-backed forces in Libya over the weekend. We've got Syria, we've got everything you mentioned earlier. So the situation is very clear in terms of challenges. So the question is, what about the US here? And what about the role that the US is willing to play or not to play in the region? I think that's a fundamental, obviously, player that seems to be out of the picture, bizarrely.
Well, you're right. And, the main important country militarily in the Mediterranean was the American Sixth Fleet until recently. And the Sixth Fleet was keeping some sort of a balance. Had it still been around, Turkish ships and planes could never have sent 7,000 former rebels, including a number of jihadists, from Syria to Libya. This is clearly a major challenge. Now, this has to do with what we discussed before. When America was sort of sure of becoming a net exporter of oil, then the Trump administration policy was to say, we don't need boots on the ground anymore. We don't need to send our boys to die in the sands of Iraq, as we say in America, or Iran or Afghanistan in the stands or wherever. Bring the boys back home, America first. And you also have to keep in mind that Donald Trump was elected, among other things, because he won in 3 swing states where there had been a very significant toll of young people who died in the military, because these were states that were in the Rust Belt. There were no jobs, and they went into the military, came back dead, and Trump won by a small margin in those states, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and another. And always remember, is it Wisconsin or another? And this is how he won in 2016, which is, of course, a major challenge for him in the 2020 election. Now, with that, the situation has changed. Nowadays, America is probably going to be, or is already being, I'm not sure, at the hour we speak, to become a net oil importer and not exporter. So if you're a net oil importer and you're the superpower challenged by China, can you remain away from the region, from the Middle East? This is a major challenge. And, we probably don't have to read into Trump in a sort of a strategic view. I mean, if I have not read John Bolton's book, but like all of us, I read some juicy parts in the press, which deserve the 2 million advance that he got. I have to say it was more than what I got from for Away from Chaos, and much to my regret. And it's not really a strategic issue. It's more of a tactical issue for America. It's a big challenge. Now, as far as the Libyan question is posed, it seems very difficult to understand or to admit that Turkey alone could go to Libya, could, even though the Sixth Fleet is not everywhere, I mean, they would have noticed. So to what extent did Washington let things happen in Western Libya, i.e. in Tripolitania, so that even though there are some problems between Turkey and the West, nevertheless, it was American weapons, because Turkey is a NATO country, that defeated Russian weapons in eastern Libya. And this is something which is still a little unclear, but it seems quite unlikely that this could have happened within some American benevolence towards Turkey. To the US, the Middle East is far away, and for jihadists in the good old days of Al-Qaeda and Ayman al-Zawahiri, where things were so clear-cut, Ayman al-Zawahiri had elicited the US as the faraway enemy. It's far away, so they are not really concerned, as we are in Europe, by the daily presence in our immediate neighborhood on the other side of the seas, and in some of our derelict or underprivileged banlieues, of elements that come from this region, and that's proved in the 2015, 16, 17 to be posing real threats to European societies. To go back to London, there was an attack a few days ago, which was reminiscent of the fact that this is a danger which has not disappeared. And therefore, here again, I believe that the American agenda is one thing, and the European agenda is something different. And this is why, to link the answer to your second question to what I said earlier on, the necessity for a much stronger European build-up in terms of security and defense is now, is proven by Libya, if I may say so. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Oh, your mic. Oh, yeah.
I'm here. Sorry, I had a small issue. Yeah, thank you. So that brings us to to back to Europe. Thank you for the transition. So obviously, this change in the region, with the US having less of an important role in the region, put Europe back on the map, back on the agenda. Can you tell us your view about this new relationship that could emerge also between Europe and the Middle East? And also, could the Middle East region be a new opportunity for Europe as well from an economic standpoint, not only just from a security standpoint?
And vice versa, because this is one of the big issues for the post-COVID era. When we discovered that even face masks had to be ordered from China, and not only all European states, but even French regions competed against one another to to overbid in order to have 10 million of masks delivered. So this showed us how dependent we were and how sort of global capitalism, this is my lefty moment, was so obsessed with profit that they just didn't care about issues of security and market supplies and everything. So this has been food for thought for many people in Europe, and add that to this issue of environments. There is now a feeling that the hyper-extended supply chain to China and this sort of exclusive or monopolistic supply chain to China and to some extent to India was extremely dangerous, and it was not good for the climate. So some people have started to talk about what in French we call relocalisation, which I guess in English is it reshoring or something. I mean, the FT uses reshoring, no? Isn't that?
Yeah.
Yes, it's okay. So
sounds like it. Yeah.
It's in the FT. It's halal and kosher, of course, and the whatever it's called. And when you think of the way when we were young, we used to talk about the Asian tigers, i.e. Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, and others that benefited at the time from Japanese prosperity. Now we have China, which is a different issue. The tiger has eaten a lot around him. And already in the southern and eastern shores of the Mediterranean, a supply economy had started in Turkey, first and foremost, before Mr. Erdogan went with his neo-Ottoman policy and translated his economic wealth into a much more aggressive issue. And we now have also something like in Morocco. The price of labor in Morocco is now lower than it is in China. There are already, a number of products which are being manufactured in a country like Morocco, from automotive parts to not only textile, but also, electronics and the like. Tunisia, if its economic challenges could be dealt with, has a highly educated middle class, which has created an entrepreneurial society, which was hampered by political despotism in the past, which is now grappling with the political transition. But there's a very big potential here, maybe in Egypt tomorrow, and why not in the Levant the day after tomorrow, plus Israel, which is also playing a significant role in the region. Then political reasons may hamper those developments, but it's there, and the Gulf is definitely willing to fuel that, if you forgive the joke or the pun, with investments. So with this, we could foresee a vision of the region which would boost entrepreneurs instead of oil rents in the region, which is the only way to reach an economic balance instead of this oil money buying social peace, which has led to violence, which has led to the spread of Islamist political ideology and the like. And we definitely would be far less dependent on the Chinese issue. So this is one of the options which is envisaged, but this is highly dependent, of course, on the political developments that we shall see in the months to come. And for the time being, you know, we're still sort of, particularly in Europe, because of social security, of benefits and the like, we haven't yet measured the full blast of the crisis, which is felt much more in America because you have 40, I don't know, millions of people on the dole, unemployed already. In Europe, it's going slower, but there is a time where we're going to have to pay the price. And so if we do not manage to boost economic and social initiatives sooner than later, this is going to be a major problem. For the time, we're obsessed with security, we're obsessed with our own economic problems, but we definitely have to foresee what is going to happen in our southern environment and also Eastern European environment. But much of Eastern Europe is already in the EU, and it's another issue.
Thank you very much. That would be my last question, and I think then we can turn to the questions from the audience. We already have a couple, so please feel free to type your questions in the messaging box. Gilles, talking about you know, the impact on obviously the economic impact of COVID-19 on both Europe and the region, and talking about this watershed moment in the region you have very well described. I would like to ask you to tell us your view about political Islam in the region, given the fact that, as you said earlier, the old model is no longer working.
Well, you know, political Islam was boosted by the tremendous rise of oil prices from 1973 onwards, because it was a conservative political resource for the oil monarchies. And then it was hijacked, as I mentioned earlier on, by the Iranian Revolution as a revolutionary political resource. Then you had those developments, which I write about in detail in the book, about what I call the three phases of jihad. Jihad against a nearby enemy in Afghanistan, then in Egypt, in Algeria, from Christmas 1989, when the Red Army invaded Afghanistan, to 1997, when Algeria, Egypt, and the like managed to get rid of their Islamist guerrillas. This first phase originally was boosted by America and by the CIA, because it was an alliance between, did I say no? No, it's about 1979. This was the beginning of the Afghan war, sorry. This was for the US and for the Arab Sunni Gulf monarchies an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone: Russia, the USSR on the one hand, and Iran on the other. The Red Army had to leave Kabul on the 15th of February 1989. It was defeated, and that led to the Berlin Wall issue on November 9, 1989. And also they had hoped that Iran would not be perceived by the Muslim world as a champion anymore, as a herald, because after all, it was the US and the Saudis that had ousted the infidel Soviet Union, the communists, the atheists out of the abode of Islam in Afghanistan. Then you had the second phase, which was Al-Qaeda against the faraway enemy, which I mentioned, which was very impressive in the capacity they had to control the media worldwide. And then it did not work either. And Al-Qaeda could not benefit from the US invasion in Iraq as of 2003, because they did not manage to engineer a Sunni resistance there that would oust the Yanks, as they thought. And then there was this third phase, which was ISIS, and that coincided acts of terrorism in European soil, most of them, and the Syrian civil war, the Iraqi civil war, and the Sunni-Shia divide that became more and more important as a sort of major fault line. Now, with that, those models of political Islam have reached such an intensity and such violence and have delivered nothing except chaos, precisely. That populations in the region are tired with it. They're looking for for an alternative model. Also, they, instead of being directed against the West, it has become more and more internalized in terms of Shia versus Sunni violence. If you look at what is happening in Israel and in the West Bank today, think of 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the very idea that Israel could annex parts of the West Bank would have, translated into fury and revolts in the Arab world. Very, very few people are moving a finger now. The Gulf Arabs are obsessed with the Iranians. The Iranians are obsessed with the Gulf Arabs. The Turks are obsessed with the Syrians or the Russians or what have you. And this, of course, with this new dimension, that is to say that oil may not be the name of the game exclusively as it was over the last 4 decades, means that political Islam, as a sequel to the rise of oil, or the centrality of oil, may not play the same role as it did before, and that competition may use political competition may use a different parlance and different avenues. But this is only sort of a view of the future.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. We have a number of very good questions. I think we have a few questions about Saudi Arabia. So maybe we can start with that. And obviously the impact on the Saudi monarchy of the obviously low oil prices, and in terms of what does it mean in terms of stability is one question, and ability to maintain the model of development that Saudi Arabia has had over the few decades. So I think that's the first question about Saudi Arabia. Someone is asking an interesting question. Do you think that Mohammed bin Salman can succeed in asserting themselves as the successful proponents of new Arabic model à la chinoise, a combination of economic aggressiveness, control, social liberalization, and absolute political control?
Okay, as of Saudi Arabia, the challenge and the sort of catch-22 issue there is that in order to engineer a post-oil economy and a post-oil model, you need investment in infrastructures that can only be provided, because of their magnitude, by oil money. I.e., you have to find out to reach the time period between the exhaustion of the oil prices and the launching of the new economic model. Like, think of this huge project which is called NEOM, which is this northwestern corner of the kingdom, bordering the Gulf of Aqaba or Eilat, Egypt, Jordan, and Israel, where they would have a sort of a digital economy and the like. This would create, in the Saudi view, a sort of city of the future. But in order to launch that, you have to benefit from oil money. Is there now enough oil money already to launch those projects? This is the big question. And a number of long-term investments had to be scaled down because you need the money to deal with the daily expenditures of the Saudi population. So probably we're going to see, as I mentioned earlier on, a sort of rebalance of the prices of oil, but they probably won't reach the heights that we knew before. And the problem is that, you know, when you still have high oil prices, you do not feel that you're in such a hurry to go and work, because after all, it's comfortable, you know, for some people. And then when you're hard pressed, then the prices have gone down, and you don't have the money to engineer to prepare for the infrastructure change that would make the reformation or the reforms possible. So that's one thing. And it's a way to answer your second, more pointed question on the sort of Chinese model. Most people in most governments in the region are fascinating with China, all the more so as China is becoming the number one superpower, or the second superpower, whichever you want. Because after all, you know, you don't need democracy, particularly in countries where there is no tradition of liberty in the culture, where there is a top-down political model. But you know, this does not go really with what we have seen since the so-called Arab Springs, which most of them happened in the wintertime, actually, of 2011, or the revolts of 2019, the Hirak movement in Algeria, also the upheavals in Iraq against Iran, that was sort of hijacking the oil money because they were embargoed by the US, in Lebanon, in Sudan. And so there is a mix, and there is pressure today on authoritarian regimes to move ahead. But to what extent those regimes can deliver economically before reforming the structure of governance, this is a big issue. And you know, if you have market competition and the like, that means that you have a bourgeoisie, or that you have a middle class that will vie for political power, political representation. And this, of course, is going to be a challenge on monarchical regimes, as was the case in Britain or in France or in Europe from the 18th to the 19th century.
Thank you very much. Maybe we could turn to another question about Libya, asking about what do you think the next steps in the Libyan conflict could be? And is an Egyptian ground intervention likely to happen?
Well, I believe it would be very complicated because, you know, Egypt cannot move without a green light from the United States. The Egyptian military, the weapons, the ammunitions, I mean, some of them were provided by France and paid for by Saudi Arabia recently, from warships to warplanes, but nevertheless, you know, cooperation between the Egyptian and the American military are really very, very tight. It is really very tight. So In a way, in Libya, America again may be leading from behind, quote unquote. You know, this is how President Obama described the upheaval or the toppling, sorry, of Colonel Gaddafi, where he let the Brits and the frogs, if I may say so, go strike first, and they were refueling in the skies. You know, Libya is a disaster because it's a long story. I mean, relations with Gaddafi were very unclear. Everybody thought he was a dictator, but his oil was of such excellent quality that everybody competed to and courted him from Britain and France and other countries, and Italy, of course. Now, he was ousted, and neither the Brits nor the French were able to sort of make military victory evolve into political solutions. The country was fragmented along tribal lines that would build on oil money, and then it became a regional battleground between the Muslim Brother faction backed by Turkey and Qatar in Tripolitania, and the anti-Muslim Brother factions and General Marshal Haftar backed by the Emirates, by Egypt, in Benghazi, in the eastern part, in Cyrenaica. Now, there was a lot of French-Italian mischief, which I think did not help, and which are over now, but it may be a little late. And we have this unbelievable transportation, if I may say so, by all means, of the Syrian conflict into Libya, where you have 7,000 Syrian rebels and jihadists, plus many local Libyan jihadists who were freed to join the fight against Haftar, who are fighting forces backed by Russia, as is the case in Syria, where Russia backs the Assad regime. And in Syria, the Turkish military cannot deploy its strength because it does no control of the skies, because it's only the Russian Air Force that can that can survey the Syrian skies. Whereas in Libya, Turkish planes have access to the Libyan skies. And that definitely seems to have also made a significant difference. So Libya may also be a testing ground in the American will to check Russian growth in the region. But the problem may be that it will be at the expense of Europe, because instability in Libya is a major problem for neighboring Tunisia, Algeria, of course, Egypt, Italy. If you have now boat people coming out of Western Libyan ports under Turkish control, and we have seen how Mr. Erdogan was eager to use migrants to pressure the European Union only a few months ago at the Greek border. So this is a major issue, not to mention the fact that, this is a NATO member which is becoming quite hostile to other NATO members, and a French frigate that was trying to check the contents of a cargo had left the Turkish harbor of Haydar Pasha to the Libyan harbor of Misrata was, I don't know how to say that in English, was catched by the radar of Turkish warships, and which was a significant naval incident that had never happened between two NATO countries since the foundation of NATO. So we're in, if I may say so, really in troubled waters.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Another question about this time about moving to Iran. to what extent do you deem a delayed Persian Spring in Iran possible in the context of US sanctions, COVID-19, economic recession, and so on?
Well, there is a very strong resilience dimension in Iran because the Iranians have been used to live under sanctions. So it's not as if it were in a country where sanctions were unknown. The Iranians, the Iranian population has been used to live in a sort of war economy for more or less since the revolution. The problem is to what extent the Iranian regime or administration can still deliver anything. And Iran, in order to protect its borders from a Western attack, has invested in control over a very significant amount of the Middle East that reached out to the Mediterranean, i.e., thanks to Hezbollah controlling southern Lebanon and Lebanon in general now, and also the backing of the Assad regime and army in Syria, which is a military success with, of course, the major help of Russia. Why would they do that? Because as they had their missiles and soldiers in Lebanon and in Syria, it was very easy to attack Israel. And putting pressure in Israel safeguarded to some extent Iranian borders. In case there was an attack on Iran, then Iran had the capacity to inflict very significant damage on Israel. This is not exactly the case anymore because Hezbollah has not attacked Israel for quite a long time. Attacks against Israel were made from Syria, but A, the Israeli bombed heavily Iranian facilities in Syria. B, in Syria, there is now another important regional power, which is Russia. And Putin has excellent relations with Bibi Netanyahu, who is always trying to use the Russians against America, so to blackmail each of the two for his own sake. And Russia is not really interested in letting a free hand to Iran in Syria, particularly against Israel. So there are a number of contradictions there. Also, the post-JCPOA sanctions were heavily felt, which led to Iran taking as much of Iraqi oil as possible for its own siphoning oil from Iraq. That is what led to the Iraqi revolts of last year, because, and the Shias in the south of Iraq attacked the Italian consulates in the holy Shia cities, something which was unheard of. Therefore, the capacity of Iran to have the sort of empire over the so-called Shiite crescents is now significantly limited. Also, they were badly impacted by COVID-19, as I mentioned earlier on. To what extent is it taking a faster pace? Sorry. I don't know. I don't think that the Iranian authorities are now in a very strong position. They have refrained since COVID-19 from any attacks for fear of retaliation. And this is also a very unstable issue. But the Gulf is not in great shape either. And when Saudi Arabia was in this competition against Russia so that they would increase their production and oil prices would go down, then you had US senators from Northern Dakota, from Texas, Republican senators pro-Trump, and who always vetoed any sanctions against Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, who said that's enough is enough. If this oil war, which ruins our American shale producers, goes on, we're gonna veto any arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, as a consequence, offered an armistice in Yemen. You know, so most of the main leaders, powers in the region have been weakened. Turkey has been weakened at home, but there's a sort of projection of Erdogan into foreign policy, regional policy. This sort of the Mediterranean is part of the natural Lebensraum of Turkey and Qatar. But this is, of course, something which introduces a major clash with bordering Western Mediterranean countries like Italy, France, Spain, Greece, of course, which is at the core of that expansion, and which revives old memories of the Ottoman sea jihad. You know, so there again, America sees that from afar. We're right in the middle. And this is these are the shores of the sea we share as Frenchmen, as Italians, as Spaniards, as Greeks, with Algeria, Libya, Turkey, or Egypt, and this is a major issue for us.
And thank you very much again, Gilles. I mean, we have maybe a last question. I'm conscious that we are past the hour now, so we have a couple of minutes left, and that could be the a way of concluding. Someone is asking a question about Joe Biden new policy in the MENA region. Do you think he would just replay Obama's policy or bring something new to the table?
It's difficult to replay Obama's policy because Obama clearly wanted Iran to come back in the region because his assumption was that Iran is part and parcel of the Middle East. You cannot just erase it from the table. Something which was, of course, abhorrent to Saudi Arabia. Trump embraced the Saudi position, and then pressure on Iran significantly weakened the Iranian regime. So I believe that whatever policy, if Biden is elected, whatever policy he chooses, will take into account this weakening and will probably help him look for, if not regime change, at least a very significant behavior change in Iran. To what extent is the Iranian establishment ready to trade the continuity of the leadership of the country, of this new class of the Iranian revolution, at the condition that they stop being un-American or anti-Saudi, just benefit from what they did, like revolutionaries in France, became supporters of the empire and became nationalists instead of being revolutionary under Napoleon? Or are they going to stick to this revolutionary ideology because they think that if the day they stop threatening Israel, they're dead? This is a big question mark. I think it's too early to say because Trump, even though he's not fared very well in the last weeks, is still alive and kicking. And B, we do not know exactly what are the determinants of Biden's foreign policy in case he were elected, because it's not totally clear now how he will arbitrate between the very different components of the Democrats in America, and there are competing foreign policy agendas among the Democrats, and this is not, of course, going to be the main issue in the voters' choice in America. And to quote from Bill Clinton, it's, as you know, one of his advisors, it's the economy, comma, stupid, point d'exclamation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Gilles Kepel, for this fascinating discussion. I think it's now high time for people who really enjoy this discussion to maybe have a look at your book. I posted the link on Amazon on the chat. Thank you again very much. Thank you to Sciences Po Alumni for helping to organize this event. And I'm sure we'll have another chance to speak to you soon in the next coming months. There is so much going on in this region that it's never ending. So thank you very much, Gilles.
My pleasure, and thank you all for attending, and see you soon. Ciao.
Thank you to everyone for the questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.